Kat and I finished Golden Wind, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5, Golden Wind. What a concise title. So I was holding off on talking about it as we were going through it, just because I didn't really want to chunk it out too much. I didn't want to do it too piecemeal, like I think I might have done with Part 4. Whoa, my throat's dry. And just kind of, I want to talk about it more as like a single package and get all my thoughts in one, which is a little easier because Golden Wind is not the most complicated part of JoJo. I was actually shocked when I looked it up and I realized that Part 5 and 6 have almost the same number of chapters. They're almost as long as each other. Part 6 has like 5 more chapters, which I find crazy because back when I read the manga, Part 5 took me about 3 days to read and Part 6 took me 4 days to read. So in my mind, it's always been like maybe 20% longer. But no, they're actually about equivalent. I just think that Part 6 has way more going on. Part 5, and this is one of the best things about it, Part 5 is just a straight shot. It's a very simple structure. Get to the goal. The goal changes about halfway through-ish. But for the most part, Golden Wind is a rush down of energy and fights and character stuff. And not a whole lot going on in between. It's almost like a whirlwind. I believe the whole plot takes place over the course of maybe a week. It might be a week. Honestly, less. Like it's like 5 days, which is crazy because this feels like there's so much shit that happens. If I remember correctly, Little Feet occurs in the morning. Man in the Mirror happens like an hour later. Then they leave. This is like going to be full spoilers, by the way. I don't care. Then they leave. They get on the train in like the noontime or afternoon. And that's when Grateful Dead and Beach Boys happens. Then in the at night is Babyface, which leads directly into them driving to Venice, which is when White Album happens. And then over the course of that, like the sun starts to come up. So essentially, that's like 5 insane life or death fights that happen in one day. It does really put it into perspective that almost the entirety of La Squadra comes at them on one day. It was like, they really aren't pacing it out. They were really intending to make like a brutal, deadly assault on Bruno's team. And that's kind of what most of the pacing is like. Just breakneck, which I love. I think that in many ways, Part 5 is kind of almost like Araki redoing Part 3 in a way, with a similar kind of structure and ensemble cast. This is actually kind of almost directly referenced in the anime because the second ending song is The New Crusaders, or Modern Crusaders, I think, by Enigma. So there's kind of there's an acknowledgement that artistically it's kind of like he's going back to that kind of a story. I think that Part 5 represents Araki really, really hitting it like a gold spot. Pun not intended. But hitting what I mean is that it feels like from the beginning, Phantom Blood has its problems. Everyone says it's a little rough. But what really grabbed me about it and what encouraged me to stick through the series is that there are these flashes of really great writing from Araki. You can see the clear, if all he wrote was Part 1 and he moved on to all he wrote was Phantom Blood and he moved on to something else afterwards, and not even JoJo's, And I was there at the time. I would have said, I think that you would have said, well, it's not the most ambitious story. It's not the most groundbreaking story, but there's some really cool stuff in here, and this is a guy to keep an eye on. He's really like, this is a guy who's Araki is onto something, right? He's an interesting voice. Of course, he then continued the series, and I feel like he just kept on chipping away and working on his writing, and part 5 is where like everything really comes together for me. All these things he'd been working on and kind of like shoring up as part of his creative process were like, oh, it all comes together now. Part 1 has these great, the strongest thing is easily like the rivalry between Jonathan and Dio. They are like this amazing, extremely archetypal, but extremely compelling hero and villain, good versus evil dynamic. But there's also, there's so much wacky stuff in there. I love this. You know what? It's kind of an underrated scene. It gets overshadowed by the meme that everyone is fucking sick and tired of for years. But like the "It Was Me Dio" scene. The part that always stuck out to me about that scene was Dio comes and he steals Erina's first kiss, and she's so disgusted by him, she like pushes him off and she throws herself to the ground and she starts washing her mouth out with like muddy water from a puddle. Like, that's such a great moment. That's such a great character moment. It tells you so much about Erina. And Dio is so like insulted and it's so great. I love the scene. I think one of my favorite scenes in Phantom Blood is actually when Dio's a young man and he's in a tavern, I believe, and he beats another patron at chess. And the guy gets so mad, he fucking like slams Dio's face down into the table. And Dio there's this shot where he looks at this knife that's laying on the table next to him, and his hand clenches up. It's all in one shot. His hand clenches up, and you know exactly what he's thinking and what he wants to do. And then it just relaxes, and he goes, soon. Just like you can almost read it on his face, like in time, all of this is gonna be. I'll be rewarded for weathering through all of this. And then, of course, he believes he does when he, gets the stone mask and all that. But that's neither here nor there. There's like these interesting things, right? The wacky writing stuff and the great dynamics, like the hero villain dynamics in part 1. There's this he starts doing he starts working on like his characters and stuff in part 2. Part 3 is obviously stands. I think that part 3's cast suffers a little bit. And that Araki spent part 3, like the first half especially, feels a lot like he's kind of training. He feels like he's going through the motions, not going through the motions necessarily, but it's like he's doing reps of trying to figure out how to write stance. And then like towards the back half, he really figures it out and he kind of locks it in. But I think some of the characterization suffers. There's this nice kind of overall vibe to the Stardust Crusaders. But when you really look at them, they're a little bit lopsided. Kakyoin and Avdol don't have that much to do. Kakyoin I don't think he's the most interesting character. Avdol, like I believe I said back in the Stardust Crusaders segment on this podcast, he's like a mentor with nothing to teach. And Araki, I think, kind of had a really hard time figuring out what to do with him, so he just has him die twice. He has him, like, tragically die twice to motivate the other characters. He was so black, he was the first one to die twice. And then in part 4, he starts to really get, I think, his character writing down. Part 4 is this really laid back vibe. It's a lot of people just hanging out, going on relatively inconsequential adventures and mischief. I say that they all turn into life or death because it's JoJo, so of course it does. But it's not like the scope is very small. And even when the main villain comes into the picture, Kira, the scope is still quite small. There's a guy who kills someone like 2 people a year in this small town. It's not the world-ending threat or world-threatening threat like Dio was in part 3. But he really figured out, like, he starts to write these really charming friendships and moments with characters just interacting with each other and helping each other out, hatching schemes, and like he really starts to polish that up. And part 5, I think, is this great conglomeration of all of these skills he'd been building. His artwork at that point had begun to evolve into what I think the style many people would associate with JoJo, these kind of the much more lithe, kind of beautiful men with these kind of like lean, muscular, closer to the Greek sculpture physiques than the Fist of the North Star type, like fucking semi-truck shoulders that they all have beforehand. The stands had gotten much more creative. The stand fights are phenomenal. Part 5 has some of the best fights in the series. The group dynamics are great. I absolutely love the main cast of part 5. From the first moment that you see them interacting in the cafe before Giorno comes to meet them, you get such a good idea of how each of these people, how they are individually, but also how they function as a group. Much later during the epilogue, the Sleeping Slaves epilogue, where you actually get like a flashback to before Giorno even met any of them, you can see them functioning like totally as a group. You can picture exactly what their dynamic is. I love the way that they interact with each other, and every one of them feels very defined. Even Abakio, who's a little bit more quiet and he kind of hangs out in the corner more, that's kind of his place in the group. He's the quieter, more thoughtful one. Mista's kind of like a fun guy. He's a little bit on the older end of the group. And he's got, of course, the horrible fear of the number 4. Narancia and Fugo have this almost mentor-student relationship, even though Narancia is technically older than Fugo. Fugo's much smarter than him. And then Bruno is kind of this leader who keeps all of these rascals in check. Abakio also has kind of a paternal, almost a paternal energy to him. And then Giorno comes into the picture and basically changes the course of their lives. I really like Giorno's... I really like Giorno. I came into the JoJo community before the Part 5 anime came out. I believe I caught up to it like winter break of 2017 or something like that. I was definitely on a break from school that was like a week or two. And it was shortly after the Part 4 anime had ended. I went through the whole Part 4 anime. I had nothing better to do, and I was into the show. And then I jumped to the manga, and I remember Giorno was the first... Like, I'd been enjoying the series a lot up to that point. Obviously enough to go read the manga. I was super interested in it. I also had a friend who was really into it, who basically actually got me into the series. And I was very curious about Part 5. I thought the art looked cool, and he's got like a stand that can give life to stuff and make animals out of inanimate objects. It's cool. It's a neat idea. And Part 5 was when I became like a JoJo super fan. I can pinpoint literally the exact chapter. It's during the White Album fight. The end of the White Album fight was like... I was locked in. I was like, okay, this is going to be a big deal in my life forever. I'm never letting go of this. Very, very strong impact on me, like in my formative teenage years. And I think that before that, I had never really super connected to a JoJo besides Joseph. I mean, everyone loves Joseph, except for Kat. Apparently. Kat doesn't like Joseph. I find this really weird because Kat loves Looney Tunes stuff and Joseph is the most Looney Tunes character in the series. And she's like, man, I don't care for him. Her mind is an enigma. But I love Joseph. I thought Jotaro was fine. I like Jotaro more so as a secondary character. But as the series goes on, I do like Jotaro a lot. Like in the totality of his character. Like what you see of him, especially in like from part 3 to part 6, what you see of his character, I think he's actually really interesting and I like him a lot. But as a protagonist, I never quite vibed with him. And then I ended up liking Josuke a lot more on rewatch. I liked him a lot more, but I didn't quite connect to him on the first time. But Giorno, and I think a lot of people might find this surprising because many people find Giorno boring. But Giorno was like, just clicked with me so hard. I thought he was so cool. I loved his vibe. I loved his look. I absolutely adore the serene, calculated, but still kind of passionate vibe that he gives off. I love his ambition. He's just such a strong, compelling character to me. And I really love how balanced he is. Specifically because, so Araki kind of does this alternation in his protagonists. He does hot and cold. Jonathan's a cold protagonist. He's a very traditional stoic hero. Although not entirely stoic, but he's like a traditional noble hero. Joseph is obviously hot. He's hot-headed. He's explosive and silly and funny, and he does crazy shit all the time. Jotaro is cold. He's got a cold exterior. Josuke is warm and friendly. Giorno is cold, but he has this kind of like nobility inside of him. The fact that he is the son of both Jonathan and Dio. He has this. The premise of his character is basically, what if Dio was good? Which ties into like a huge part of Golden Wind's themes. What if Dio was good? And there is a clear parallel between the two of them. Dio was born into a shitty situation. His mother left them. His father was a drunk, like an abusive drunk. No one respected him. He was like a gutter rat. Again, that scene when he's like in the tavern, he almost stabs that guy. And then suddenly, by a stroke of fate, his life is changed and he gets welcomed into the Joestar household. But he holds on to that evil. He's resentful and bitter towards the world. He just wants to kill shit. And in part 1 especially, he's very sadistic. If he doesn't kill people outright, he only leaves them alive to torture them or do something even worse to them, right? Just like he's so high on power, he's like a psychopath in part 1. Giorno, as well, is also born into a shitty situation. Well, first of all, his mom fucked Dio, so she can't be that great of a person. But his mother was kind of an absentee. She neglected her son quite a bit growing up. His stepfather was abusive towards him. But what was Giorno? Giorno is on track to kind of being like Dio and feeling a sense of resentment towards the world. But what changes? Well, where Dio had this kind of opportunity fall out of the sky, and someone suddenly is now taking care of him, Giorno, I think this is important. Giorno's change is that he sees a mobster on the run from some people who got into some kind of a tussle with, some enemies of this guy. And Giorno looks at this guy who's just all beaten, bloody, and fucked up, and he's like trying to shrink away in an alley, and he's collapsed. He can barely move. And the guys come around, and they're like, "Hey, have you seen this this guy who fits this description?" And Giorno feels empathy. He looks at this mobster and he thinks, in some way, I don't know who this guy is, I don't know where he comes from, I don't know why he's like this, but I look at him struggling and I in a way, I see myself in him. And he actually makes a completely one-sided human connection. He has empathy for this man and he points them in the wrong direction, and they go, and he saves this guy's life. And his kindness, his willingness, and this is also important, he lies. He lies because lying in this case is what he thinks is the right thing to do, which also ties into a kind of larger thing about that occurs over the course of this part, where Giorno is comfortable going outside of typical morality. A lot of children are inclined to tell the truth. They're taught to tell the truth, and they'll just do that, right? But Giorno will lie, and he will do things that are not typically moral because he believes, typically moral in like maybe especially an institutional sense where he wants to become a mob boss, but he wants to do it to subvert the typical law and government because that's the way, because he sees that they are too corruptible and they are too it's kind of this impression that I get. They don't do a good enough job of ensuring that people live happy lives and helping the people. He has noble goals, but he performs them. He achieves them through maybe dubious means, not traditionally noble means. And that's what I really like. One of the things I really like about Giorno, and he's also got that, I would say for the most part, he kind of has the Jonathan spirit, but sometimes that Dio comes out of him. Sometimes he has this ruthlessness. If he believes that you are worthy of punishment, he will fuck you up. Most famously with Chocolata, when he just absolutely obliterates him. That scene is so good. I'll get to that in a bit. But I always love that about Giorno. I really like that. I think there's one thing that he said. Maybe this is going to sound super edgelord to you guys, but there's one point, and I forget who he says it to, but it's something like, if you're willing to kill someone, what is it? It's like, if you're willing to kill someone, you need to be ready to give up your own life. And now, like, this is like when Giorno's turned the tables on him. And because that always pissed me the fuck off about JoJo villains, is they're like these murderous assholes. And then suddenly they're backed into a corner and they turn into these like cowards. They're like, oh, don't hurt me or whatever. And I was like, it makes me really glad when they get beat the fuck up, because I'm like, you just want to, I don't know, like morally, I feel that. Like, I was literally thinking that. I'm like, how can you be to be like someone who just kills without mercy, right? Just kills random people for no reason, but you're afraid of getting killed. You're not willing to die yourself. Like, that always pissed me off. And Giorno like acknowledges that, and he's like, guess what? I'm here to fuck you up now. And then he like verbalized that. Like, I really felt this click with that character. I've always really, really liked Giorno, even though he's not maybe not as active as of a protagonist. I think in part the fact that he isn't as active is partially because Part 5 has a really tight-knit group where all the members get to do something. There's a lot of fights in like Part 3 that are just Jotaro fights. And, you know, everyone gets their time to shine, but a lot of them are Jotaro fights. And there's some Polnareff fights. It's like Jotaro and Polnareff fights, because those seemed like the characters he liked writing the most. And there's like a few Joseph things. Avdol has 2 fights. One with Polnareff and one with... That's the Mariah fight, and he's back to back with... Well, back to front. with Joseph. Kakuin's got like 2. They're mostly Jotaro fights. In Golden Wind, everyone kind of gets a chance to shine, even if it's just once with like Fugo, for instance. Abakio only really gets 1 fight. But like, there's some good ones. Like, I forgot how much I actually really like Little Feet, Narancia's first fight. That's actually a really cool encounter in retrospect, because it's kind of like Araki taking the typical JoJo stand fight formula and flipping it on its head. the usual stand fight goes like, this. The characters get into a situation, something weird starts happening. They have to figure out how the enemy's ability works and where they are, right? It's rarely ever a one-on-one direct confrontation. It's usually someone's trying to ambush them. They're trying to take them out from afar. They're hidden. They are, it's something like that, right? Because JoJo stand fights are actually much closer to like mysteries and horror movies than they are like a traditional martial arts story, for instance. And then of course, like, they figure it out. They figure out either what the opponent's ability is and how it works, or where they are, or how to beat them. And the mystery is solved, and then the tables turn. And I thought that in Little Feat, he kind of does a little bit, he plays around with it a little bit, because it starts off just like that, where Formaggio, he's got this ability to shrink people. And Narancia is, at first he's like, oh my god, what's happening? What's going on? And it plays out much like a typical JoJo stand fight. But then halfway through, Narancia gets the upper hand. And then suddenly the tables are turned. And it's not like he doesn't win immediately. There is now a whole sequence where actually the villain is now trying to figure out how the protagonist's stand works. This is the first time we've seen Aerosmith, and you can tell immediately about the... obviously, Aerosmith is a plane with guns and bombs. He does that immediately. But then, like, wait, how is he tracking me? How is he able to find out where I am? And, like, oh, this is actually the stuff that the protagonists usually have to do. But now we're seeing it from the enemy's point of view. And then he figures out, oh, he must have some kind of a way to detect breathing. And yeah, Narancia's got like a CO2, like a radar that detects CO2. That's part of his stand. And, then Formaggio has to figure out now, okay, well, how do I get around that? And then it all culminates in this big standoff, so to speak, a quite literal standoff. And that was like really cool. That's a very fun twist on the usual formula. I like that one a lot. I still find Soft Machine and Kraftwerk are still kind of, they're fine. They're fine. Kraftwerk is mostly, they're kind of just meant to introduce the stands. Sort of. Not even really. What does Soft Machine even really show off? Not much, but Kraftwerk has like one cool moment where he throws the stones in midair and then fixes them in place to get across the ravine. That's a neat moment. But it's mostly just fine. It's cool. It's cool to see. It's mostly a highlight just because you get really introduced to Mista. And oh my god, I love Mista. I love the relationship between Giorno and Mista. I think that it's one of the best kind of character arcs that you see over the course of the part. I love how they go from... Mista's not necessarily the most distrusting, but he doesn't quite welcome Giorno in just yet. And then over the course of this crazy day, literally like one day, I guess a few days, they go from like they just met to now they're like ride or die for each other. They are they're super close. Mista would like, they're homeboys now. That's a really satisfying relationship for me because I like both of these characters, and seeing them grow like that is great. Oh god, what do we even... There's so much to talk about with Part 5. I guess there's some stuff that I don't think not as many people know. Because a lot of it is just me saying, yeah, the fights are great. The characters are fun. The pacing is generally really good. Especially, the anime I think adapts it quite well. If there's one thing that definitely feels like a missed opportunity, it's easily Fugo. But there's a lot of background as to why that happened. Quite infamously, Fugo leaves the group at the halfway point when they all choose to betray the boss. He says, "This is too crazy. I'm out." And that in itself is not a problem. Fugo is a highly intelligent character, and in fact, man, he's so cool. Fugo has a lot of cool stuff going on that never quite gets followed up on because of stuff I'm going to talk about in a second. Fugo is a character who is highly intelligent, but he has this festering, uncontrollable rage issue as personified, as Abakio literally says, it is personified in Purple Haze, his stand. It is a rage that consumes and kills everything and can even hurt himself. This self-destructive power. And so I think that not only is Fugo maybe just naturally gifted academically, but I also kind of see Fugo as relying on his intellect over his emotions because he's afraid of his emotions. I think that he's afraid of acting passionately because he doesn't like hurting people and he doesn't want to hurt himself. So it makes tons of sense that in this situation, when he's so scared, his default is to run away. His default is to do the honestly sensible thing. He recognizes this is now a suicide mission and I didn't sign up for this. I'm going to stay loyal to the organization. Now, for the longest time, there was this misconception that Fugo was written out because he was too powerful. That came from nowhere. That has no sources, and that's not the truth at all. I mean, this is coming from the same author who wrote fucking The Hand and Okuyasu and plenty of extremely destructive stands. I mean, Araki actually said that he didn't really like... That was another reason that Avdol kind of gets left to the wayside in a lot of fights, is Araki did not... he didn't really know how to write a fire-based stand, and in fact, he doesn't revisit a fire or heat-based stand until literally part 8 with Jobin. And Jobin's like completely... It's a very, very specific type of stand that he has. I love Jobin, but... if Araki doesn't necessarily like writing a character that much, he won't just write them out of the story. Like, he let Avdol stay until almost the end, right? And he had Okuyasu. He had plenty of strong characters before. The real reason that Fugo left actually is kind of interesting, and it has to do with a lot of stuff that was going on exterior to the manga at the time. So part 5 began publishing in, hang on, let me see, Golden Wind, first chapter release date. It started printing in December 1995. So 1995-ish was like the sort of mid to late 90s was a weird time for Shonen Jump, where JoJo's had been printed up to that point. All of their classic series that were kind of like front of the magazine, front page draws to readers had basically ended. Dragon Ball was over. Yu Yu Hakusho was over. There's probably a couple more that I'm either not thinking of or like are just more popular in Japan, and so I'm not as aware of them. But basically, like, their big series had kind of dropped off, or not dropped off, but ended. And this is before, like, Yu-Gi-Oh!, One Piece, Naruto, Bleach, a lot of their other, like, let's say, like, 2000s, the big series of the 2000s, right? Those had not debuted yet. So they were in this weird in-between spot where they didn't really have anything. Now, part 4 existed. I believe I went over this last time. The JoJo's was always planned as a trilogy, and he didn't have plans for anything beyond that. Then his editor basically asked him to continue the series because it was so popular, and he was like, fine. And part 4 was kind of like I call it as like a vacation mode. The first chunk of part 4, which I think actually helps it quite a bit. He's very like relaxed and just having fun, and I think he does a lot of the story feels fun. And then like a third of the way through, he comes up with the idea for Kira, and then you can tell he's super into that, right? It feels like he didn't want to stop writing part 4. There's just so many fights near the end. So after part 4, he was actually, for this time, for real, like, done. he was like, okay, I'm good. I told the story of Joseph's son. It was this was like a little epilogue fun story, and it did really well, but I'm ready to move on to something else. And then his editor says, hey, so we're in a weird spot. Shonen Jump doesn't have any big series out right now. All of the classics are done, and we're kind of searching for new talent and new stories, and we don't have anything that's really taken off yet. You're kind of our last guy who we can put on the front cover. Could you do a part 5? And he sort of begrudgingly said, fine, I will do a part 5. And I think that this had a really unforeseen spiral on his mental state. There's an interview where he talks at length about this. He basically says that Araki is someone who you can tell absolutely loves making manga. He loves writing, he loves drawing, and it's very passion driven for him. He is just the kind of guy who can get up and draw for 6 hours a day and just go crazy. And he can do that. I believe the first several hundred chapters of JoJo were written without a single break in between. I think he wrote the first 3 parts with no breaks. It was just week to week to week to week. Because he's just crazy like that. And he's never had any health problems, at least not that we know of. He's in his 60s. He's still doing manga. Is he almost in his 70s? I don't even know. He's still doing manga. He looks crazy good for his age. He's just like this infinitely youthful, passion-driven man. Now suddenly, put him in a situation where he actually doesn't really want to be writing what he's writing. And he falls into a really deep depression. He talks about this in an interview, and he basically says that he was grappling with these issues of, why am I even doing this? He basically just got way too into his own head. Why do I make manga? Is it for fame? Is it for money? Is it for my ego? And he went into this really dark, dark place. And I think it really shows in the writing, because he's questioning all of these things about himself and his own motives, and the story really it involves all of these people who operate outside of the usual law. I mean, it's a pretty big jump. You go from part 4, Josuke's grandfather, who's his beloved father figure, is literally a police officer, and then we go to part 5, where they're all gangsters, and one of them, Abakio, is a former police officer who was the police are bullshit. They can't make any change. They're bought out by the gangs and the criminals. And the only way that I can make any kind of a change is by going outside of the law. That's a big change. It's also much more intense. Characters in part 5 get fucked up. They are brutal and ruthless. There's an intensity and it just feels like everything is always balancing on the edge of a knife, you know. Fucking Grateful Dead and Beach Boy. What an amazing fight. What an intense, insane, I feel like Kat thought it went on too long. She always thinks it goes on too long. But I loved every second of it. It's so, I remember reading, I had no idea what was going to happen next. It was that level of intensity was reserved for the final battles of each previous part, where you're how the fuck are they going to get out of this? That was almost every fight. I was what the fuck are they going to do to get out of this? And I think that Araki is essentially, when he's in this really dark place, he starts to write his way through it. He starts to write his way out of it. And I think that it in a funny way, kind of leads to him writing some of his best stuff. I think it leads to him writing some of his strongest material, and there's some really strong thematic messages in Golden Wind, is that, there's these incredible odds and this terrible tragedy that just permeates the part. It's just constant hardship, but the characters have this kind of this resolve and this determination, and that if they just keep pushing towards the future, eventually, finally, even if people die on the way, eventually all of their efforts are rewarded. It's almost, you feel in some ways when the characters are speaking like this, you almost feel like Araki is talking to himself, that all of this is going to be worth it. All of this is going to pay off, and that there's a reason that he is writing this story right now. There's like this gravitas that really enters the writing. I remember in, the end of the part of the White Album fight, when Mista is just so fucked up. It's such a great moment for Mista. He just keeps firing into Ghiaccio or Ghiaccio. I don't know how he's pronounced. He keeps firing into him, and just so that he can barely just push him back and back and back onto the spike to try to impale him. And every single shot just gets reflected back at him, but he has this faith. He has this faith that he'll survive every bullet. And then he's completely down. And in the last second, Giorno finally manages to get back up. And he transforms the bullet right as it strikes Mista's skull and is about to kill him. And he's like, Mista. This is one of the things I loved about their interaction throughout that fight. I only really picked up on it, I guess now the third time through. But in that fight, Giorno keeps saying like, okay, well, we just need to get the disc. We need to get the disc. That's their goal at that point. And Mista's like, I think we can do better. And it happens like once or twice throughout the fight where Mista actually inspires Giorno to push a little further. And maybe, he's maybe thinking a little more with his heart, but it actually kind of emboldens Giorno. And he actually, it inspires him to dream a little bigger. We can actually take this guy out. We can overcome this seemingly unstoppable foe. And in the end, despite the fact that Mista shot himself the fuck up, Giorno says that he has this whole speech about how Mista's resolve, his resolve is what opened up the pathway to this total victory. It looked dangerous and it incurred tons of suffering, but ultimately it was the right move because he dreamed bigger than Giorno could at that moment. I love stuff like that. I love stuff like that from this part. Oh God, what else? There's this. There is a little bit of Christ imagery in Giorno. He is the son of Dio. Like, so literally, he is the son of God. And what I like about it, I picked up more on it this time around. Again, my third time through this story. But Giorno's place in the story is almost as if to change the course of other people's lives. It's almost like and they say this at one point. I think someone, I forget who it is, it's Mista or Abacchio, says something like, whenever Giorno says something, even if I don't believe it at the time, or I think he's talking crazy, everything he says always happens to work out. And it's almost like he's giving a prophecy. There's this comparison of Giorno to being a prophet, and that his words might seem confusing and his motives might seem strange, but ultimately, when you actually follow through on what he says, he was always right the whole time. He was always true to follow this like golden path that he's seen. I like that as well. It adds to the sort of serenity of his character. There's also the fact that he's fighting the devil. He's literally fighting the devil, Diavolo. Which, by the way, I really like Diavolo. I know a lot of people also think that he's a little less interesting because he doesn't get quite as much screen time, but I think he's also following up Kira, which I think is a little difficult. I don't think any of the JoJo villains are duds. Yeah, even that one. If you've read the manga. I don't think any of the JoJo villains are true duds, especially when you kind of dig into them. I think that Araki has a really good handle on making his characters thematically resonant with each other. And Diavolo absolutely fits that bill. So for one, just the concept is so cool. A mob boss who hides his identity because he's actually one half of a split personality, and the other personality just thinks that he's the boss's right hand man, which is like incredible. That's how it's such a great concept. I love the episode where you first really meet Doppio, and you're like, what's going on with this guy? What? And honestly, in retrospect, it's very obvious what's going on from the beginning. But I do remember, like, at the start, like, reading those chapters for the first time and thinking, at least having a moment of, what? Wait, hang on. There's no way this guy's the boss. What the fuck? And then realizing, oh my god, it's a split personality over the course of the fight. Fuck! Metallica is such a great fight. Oh, it's one of the only villain fights in the series, like true villain fights in the series. There's like a few in part 7, sort of. There's sort of one in part 8, sort of. But yeah, it's like the most all-out villain fight, and it's so cool. I love that one. Such a great concept for a character. I love the kind of Rosemary's Baby angle on Diavolo, where he just, like, it's this mysterious. Again, it is like he's there is a sort of miraculous conception quality to both him and Giorno. It's a little less miraculous with Giorno because you know that, well, okay, Dio had many lovers and people that he fucked, but it is interesting, right, that he had a child with a woman, or he at least got her pregnant, and then let her live. And that's just I think of that as just the mystique of Dio. That's just, sometimes his motives are unseen, unknowable. For whatever reason, he let her go. Why? Who knows? And, but of course Giorno grows up with his actual mother and his stepfather, like Jesus, basically. I guess Joseph's the dad who stepped up. Diavolo is kind of similar. He is a miraculous, inexplicable pregnancy. He's the result of one. But he has this, and he's raised by a priest who takes him in. But he's got this darkness hidden inside of him. He's like the mirror opposite of Giorno. He grows up with a very nice situation, but he has this just what's the word? Insatiable violence and malice in him. There's a difference between King Crimson and Gold Experience. So, there's another thing. Gold Experience is the name of the first. It gets its name from the song of the same name, which was Prince's first single. Prince, a Prince song for the Son of God, huh? Prince of King of Kings. Giorno's ability is to give life. He actually imbues people with life. He gives life to the non-living. He can heal people. He can, and I always liked it. It never really comes up after the first time it happens, but the whole damage reflection thing, it very much feels like Araki is using this as some people are like, why didn't that come up again? And it's like, well, Araki never really includes it. You can assume that he still can do that. It's just more that, like, yeah, I don't know. Araki just didn't feel like writing with more of that ability. So, but I see that as a reflection of Giorno despising those who prey on the weak. I mean, I think he says as much. He says he doesn't like people who pick on things that are smaller than them. That's really, that's like abominable behavior to him. And so if you strike one of the creatures he makes, like Luca does at the beginning, you get that reflected back onto you, like karma almost. Diavolo, meanwhile, has King Crimson, which is this essentially the ability to escape consequences. a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's just like a less powerful version of the world. Instead of stopping time, you're skipping time, which he also can't interact with a lot of things while he's in the skipped time. That's another. I'll get to that in a second. Well, he's in the skip time, but really, I think that's there for thematic reasons. Really, what you can think of Diavolo's ability as consequence aversion. I will sometimes describe it in simple terms as a lag switch. That's probably the best way to describe it, of how King Crimson works. But it's basically he just like, ooh, activate my ability. I can see exactly what's going to happen in the next 10 seconds. Everything kind of goes in slow-mo, and I can go wherever I want and completely avoid any consequences. I am basically removed from the flow of fate. And he uses this to essentially subvert all misfortune. But because fate in JoJo has kind of this... There's almost like a physics property to it, where evil will always be balanced out by good. And because Diavolo is allowed to amass so much evil, Giorno, or specifically Gold Experience Requiem, kind of is created to be like the backlash against that. It's to be like the slingshot the other way. And therefore, like, a lot of people don't really understand how Gold Experience Requiem works. And it's like, well, for one, it's just like a super powered up gold version of Gold Experience. But it has this additional ability, which is essentially it calls it reverting anything to zero. I think that it's easier to explain it as a reverse King Crimson. Instead of skipping forward in time, you skip backwards in time, and he can like apply this effect to somebody, so that like instead of never suffering the consequences of something, like Diavolo can activate King Crimson as a bullet is flying towards him. He activates King Crimson, the bullet sails harmlessly through him because he basically doesn't exist in the world at that moment, and then kind of comes back. He ignores the consequences of existing wherever he was. Gold Experience Requiem forces you to go back. It forces you to go back and go back to the cause of the effect. But that you will... in such a way, he has it, he only uses it one time at the very end, and it is there to essentially cause Diavolo to die infinitely, to be locked in a perpetual cycle of dying where he can never truly complete his death. He can never go through the actual process of dying and just be done with it and move on with his soul or whatever. He will always be taken back to the beginning of the process, which many people think is a very harsh punishment. And I find that really interesting because I've thought about it and I honestly don't really think it is that. Maybe infinitely. Infinitely is a little much. But Diavolo's a bad dude. Diavolo's a bad dude. I think people are fine. This, I think, shows the distinction between how people feel about different kinds of bad acts. Like, Kira is someone that we see kill multiple innocent people. He kills main characters. He fucks people up. He's a clear, disgusting, horrible serial killer psychopath, right? He literally, like, cannot control his urge to kill. And so he gets roughed up. He gets beat up by the people of Morio. And then ultimately, Araki kind of gets to eat his cake and have it too, as the Unabomber would say. Where you get Kira gets beat the fuck up, and he gets the kind of subversive death. I love Kira's death. The fact that it's just like an accident. Which is great because Kira he always presented himself as this unremarkable, boring, normal person. And he doesn't die actually as a result of his wounds or anything from this ridiculous fight that they've just had. No, he just dies from an ambulance driver fucking up and backing up onto his head while he's on the ground. But then, of course, you get the really satisfying cathartic death where his soul then gets destroyed in the ghost alley by the hands and all that. And it's like, so you get to feel good. There's the two way of like, oh, that's a cool subversive death that is a little unexpected. Also, it's kind of set up that even if they caught Kira, they'd have no way to prove that he was actually the murderer because he did it with a fucking stand. I'm like, so it's actually quite convenient for them that he dies that way. But then you have like, oh yeah, now you get to see him like freaking out and like, no, and then he gets destroyed, but maybe not really. Go read Dead Man's Questions. And I think people feel good about that. Like, that feels like complete soul destruction. Feels like a fitting end for a disgusting, horrible serial killer. Diavolo doesn't really... Okay, he kills like 3 main characters. And he tries to kill his own daughter. And that's definitely enough for people to say, well, he deserves, narratively, it's most satisfying for him to get some kind of comeuppance. Die, I guess, you know? He's caused a lot of suffering to our main cast. But if you really think about it, Diavolo is like a drug trafficker. He's actually caused like an incredible amount of suffering throughout the world. I mean, there's a reason that racketeering is a crime. It's because gangsters used to be able to get away with saying that, well, I never did that, someone else did it. So they had to introduce racketeering to basically say, well, it's a crime to like order someone to do something illegal. It's a crime to like organize crime. You are just as liable for the murder, even if you didn't pull the trigger. And like, maybe this sounds silly to say, but like, drug abuse is bad, and it's terrible for communities. It's terrible for all communities that it's involved in. And like the amount of I mean, specifically what ticks Giorno off at the beginning that really sends him on this quest is that the mob Passione is selling drugs to kids. And what I find interesting is I went down this little rabbit hole a little while ago about just watching videos about former gangsters and stuff like that. And one thing that I find interesting is that there was almost an unspoken, I don't want to make these guys out to be cool or anything necessarily, but there was kind of an unspoken or honestly in many cases spoken policy. You could maybe call it a code of honor. A little bit. Like, many of them did have values such as don't sell drugs. If you sell drugs to the community, like, even then, essentially what they were trying to do was create almost a parallel government that they could run. A parallel system of law and law enforcement, which was, of course, exploitative to many of the people in their community, and very caustic to them. But what they always recognized was that drugs getting into the community tears families apart, it ruins people's lives, and just don't do it. You're gonna there will be severe consequences. Several like big mob families had severe consequences for people who dealt drugs, especially to kids. That was seen as extremely uncool. And Diavolo is kind of crossing this moral line in that way, where he really doesn't give a fuck about anyone else. And you see a few instances of it. It's mostly at the beginning, where Giorno's talking about the kids who are on drugs and stuff. But he's a horrible person. He's responsible for tons of death and stuff like that. I think in a way, part of it... Well, so first of all, Diavolo's first death is to get stabbed by a drug addict, which is kind of perfectly poetic, right? That's what kicks it off. And I kind of see his infinite deaths as being an extension of that. He is receiving all of the pain and suffering that he's caused to other people infinitely, right? You thought that you could avoid consequences your entire life, that you were chosen by fate to essentially be God, the King Crimson on top of everyone else. Well, actually, you're going to get, not only are you going to get the tables turned on you, you're going to get it turned harder than anyone else. you're actually going to suffer all of the consequences forever. Basically sending him to, he basically sends him to hell, right? So I don't actually mind Diavolo's death too much. I remember this a minute ago, but there is, on the Stardust Crusaders connections, I think Araki was also aware of this, because not only is there, it's kind of a similar dynamic with the group and the mission, that it's just like constantly from like one point to the next, point A to B to C. There's also literally like Polnareff shows up, which fucking Cat got spoiled on by one of those stupid the fucking blind bag, what are they, like keychains or something, like bag clips, one of those things. She got like a bag of those, and she fucking opened, I think it's like maybe one of the secret ones, but she opened fucking Polnareff, and she's like, oh, I guess he's in there. And I was like, oh my god, because it's a great reveal when you see it. Fucking got spoiled on it by merchandise. I hate those things. I hate blind bag stuff. I hate the gambling shit. She loves that shit. Yeah, but there's a cute recreation of the scene between Dio and Polnareff, where obviously in part 3, Dio is at the top of the stairs. Polnareff tries to get to the top, and then Dio like freezes time and like runs down and like picks him up and like puts him down at the bottom of the stairs again, then runs back up and assumes the exact same pose like a fucking goober. And he does this a few times to prank Polnareff. And there's a recreation of this where the roles are switched, where now Polnareff is at the top of the stairs, but actually much more vulnerable in the wheelchair, and Diavolo is at the bottom of the stairs. That's pretty great. And Polnareff has to anticipate when Diavolo is going to strike by using, he's dealt with some time shenanigan powers before, and he has figured out the blood drop trick, which is really cool. So I dig that. I'm glad Polnareff came back. It's always fun when an older character comes back. You don't get too much of that in JoJo. I guess it's pretty consistent. He actually does it every part, now that I think about it. Joseph Speedwagon comes back in part 2. Joseph is in the group in part 3. Jotaro is in part 4. Jotaro and Koichi both show up at the beginning of part 5. Polnareff shows up at the end. Jotaro is very important in part 6. And then you jump to the next universe, and there's a flashback with Johnny in part 8. We haven't gotten anything in part 9 of any part 8 characters, although I'm actually very excited. You know what I bet he's going to do? Everyone's like, oh, are Josuke and Yasuho going to show up? Oh man, that's going to be so cool. Because the Higashikatas, they had a vacation spot in Hawaii. Yeah, like oh, that would be a perfect setup to bring Josuke back. I bet he's gonna bring back fucking Carrera. I think he's gonna bring back Carrera, the Yukako analog. Dirty, smelly girl. But anyway, how much more do I have to say about part 5? I have a lot to say. I could talk about it just on and on and on. But I think you know what? It was really nice to rewatch the anime, because the White Album fight, I've mentioned it a few times. That's the moment in the manga when I first read through it that I was so excited. It was so intense. I couldn't understand how they were going to defeat this guy. He's just so incredibly powerful. He seems unstoppable. And then as it starts to happen, when like everything seems lost, and then suddenly it's like, and you get that Giorno's speech, and he's fucking holding Mista's body, and it's drawn as a reference to La Pieta, which is fucking Mary holding Jesus' body, which technically like kind of Giorno's like the Jesus analog, but it's sick as fuck anyway, even if it doesn't make as much sense symbolically. It's just so cool. And then I remember I was almost screaming during that fight. I was losing my shit. I was genuinely, I've never been reading something and wanted to scream like that before. The only other time was honestly during the True Man's World arc in part 7. But I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It's so good. It's so good. And that was again like the moment that I was locked in on JoJo. I'm a super fan of this series now. Like, I don't care. I'm all in. And then it was one of my most anticipated moments when the anime was coming out. I just could not wait until we got to White Album. I was in high school. This was 2018, so I was a junior in high school. And I was so excited. It was such a big part of my year that I was going to get to see part 5 get animated. It was the first time I'd ever been watching JoJo as it came out, and also watching a part that I had already read was really cool. There's tons of great... Oh, yeah, I do want to say on the production end, there's a ton of great stuff that's added in the anime to the manga. That was not in the original manga. A lot of the scenes of La Squadra by themselves or just hanging out were inserted. I believe the only one that you really got in the manga was the backstory of what happened to Sorbet and Gelato that motivated them to go after the boss's identity. It's like the only one that you saw. But all the other stuff like that, awesome. I fucking love that scene where Formaggio shrinks down the car and then he drops it in that guy's glass and he walks outside. And then Formaggio like releases his ability and the fucking car explodes out of that guy and falls on his wife. It's so fucking funny. I was losing my shit when I watched that the first time. Because I was like, oh, this is new. This is not in the manga. And then I don't even think... If you've never read the manga and you watch the anime, you might be surprised to learn that was anime original, because it feels exactly like something that would happen in JoJo. It was so fucking funny and ridiculous. I love that. But they nailed all the stuff that I wanted to see. And when they got to White Album, I was so psyched for it. When the day the episode came out, I was at school, and I had like how long? 40, 50-minute lunch break or something like that. And I went up to this part of my school that was usually really quiet. It was called the science lobby. It was outside where the science labs were, and it was on the second floor of that building. And there was this big, wide bench that was pretty comfy, and you could just lean back against it, like into the corner. And there was like an outlet nearby so I could plug in my laptop. And I spent a lot of time there, like writing and doing homework and, fooling around on the computer. And I was like, I'm just going to eat my lunch. there was a panini press in my school cafeteria. I pressed a delicious panini sandwich for myself. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch. This is the episode where it all goes down. I've been waiting for this. And as I'm watching the episode, this guy named Dylan gets up and he sits down next to me, and he had been homeschooled, and like there were 2 people who were homeschooled in my high school class, and one of them you could not tell at all, like very sociable, friendly guy. Clearly, like, his parents had done a lot of work to actually properly socialize him and get him outside. The other guy, this guy, you could really tell he was homeschooled. And he's just sat down next to me, and while I'm watching this masterpiece, he's just going, "What is this? What are they doing? Who is that? Is that a woman? This is weird. What's going on?" Oh my God, it was so fucking annoying. Oh my God, I just wanted to tell him to shut up. That was my first experience of that. It was annoying as hell. So it was nice to get to go through the anime again, and I was just grinning ear to ear the second time through that I watched that. It was like, okay, yeah, this is as good as I remember. This is some good shit. This is hype. I will criticize. Okay, so we watched. We have been watching the series on a couple different platforms, and we were watching some of it like pirated. We were watching some of it on Disney Plus. We watched some of it on Netflix. We watched a lot of Part 5 on Netflix. So first of all, you got the censored names. Fucking whatever. I just got to lean over and tell Kat, great, that's Grateful Dead. He's saying Grateful Dead. But really what was more than that was, man, I do not like the translation for Part 5 on Netflix. We watched it subtitled. I did not like the translation. It was extremely stilted and unnatural. It felt overly literal in a way that erased a lot of the, I'll say, the artistry or the intent of the original writing. One of the moments that really sticks out to me is the moment, the scene where they betray the boss and they get on the boat to leave, and Narancia is having these conflicted feelings about whether to stay or go, because he's not very independent. He kind of relies on other people to think for him, and now because Fugo isn't going, he's caught between two worlds, two seemingly big decisions. He doesn't want to abandon his friends, but he's so scared of the what this mission entails. And as they're speeding away, he's just kind of frozen. And then he sees Trish's arm, that she has an injury on her arm, and he realizes that the boss had tried to kill her. The boss betrayed his own daughter. And in this one moment, Narancia he realizes that he and Trish they were betrayed in the same way. Narancia was betrayed by the boy who he thought was like an older brother to him, and just cast aside like nothing. And Trish was her father, her own flesh and blood, attempted to kill her to hide his own identity, like she was nothing. And he realizes that in that way they are one and the same. And in that moment, he realizes this is what he has to do. No matter what happens, he has to stick up for someone who's like himself. And it's this great moment. He jumps into the water and he's swimming and swimming and swimming, trying to catch up with the boat. And he's screaming at Bucciarati. He's saying, stop the boat, I'm coming. And he's saying, Trish is me, I'm Trish. And then the fucking subtitles go, the injury on her arm is my own injury on my arm, or fucking something like that. It's like her arm injury is my arm injury. And it's like, dude, why did you write it like that? I feel like you could just as easily write like, her wound is my wound. It's just like perfect. There's a literal meaning to it. There is a metaphorical meaning to it. You understand exactly, like it's a much better, like more well-written line. But there's this like super just direct, like maybe it sounds fine in Japanese, but just like way too direct. And it kind of like killed a bit of the scene for me. And there's stuff like that just crops up all over the Netflix translation. And there's honestly just some examples of really sloppy scripting. Like in the last arc, when they do the Chariot Requiem and then everything after that, basically. So Silver Chariot evolves into Silver Chariot Requiem, which gets a new ability and appearance and all that. And the characters refer to it as Silver Chariot Requiem, sometimes Chariot Requiem, and then eventually, just for short, because it's kind of wordy, Requiem. They say we have to catch Requiem, or the Requiem stand. But later, and that's fine, and the subtitles translated appropriately. When the characters say, for some reason, when the characters say Requiem, they always say in the subtitles Chariot Requiem, despite the fact that the characters are not saying Chariot. And then when Gold Experience evolves into Gold Experience Requiem, the characters say Gold Experience Requiem once or twice to establish that that's the name. And then after that, they just start calling it Requiem. But the subtitles keep saying Chariot Requiem every time. And it's like it feels so rushed and sloppy, like they didn't even understand what was going on in the plot, like they weren't even looking at the screen and couldn't realize that they were talking about a completely different character who's like in the same form, with the same power-up form. Just stuff like that. And then, like, for some reason, Sleeping Slaves, which has always been translated as Sleeping Slaves, and makes way more sense to say it like that, is translated as Sleep Slave? Like that? And it's like, there's that great line that Bucciarati's kind of spirit talks to Giorno at the end of the fight, and he says, like, fate is a sleeping slave, but you've set us all free. Which is like implied the thing of like, we are all slaves to fate, but in these small little ways we can kind of chip away and work, and with our determination and our resolve we can dream of a better world. We were slaves to fate, we were destined to die, but our deaths were for a greater purpose. We thrashed against fate, and we made a better world for ourselves. Giorno, your dream was good and strong and beautiful. But in the subtitles, they keep saying Sleep Slave, and it's fucking weird, and it throws me off. They translate the fucking epilogue episode as that as well. It's just super weird. I don't know why they did it. I think that the best way to watch it is to go... you can find on some pirate sites... Like, the best translation would probably be, so there's some pirate sites that have, like, Golden Wind uncensored, so you get the actual original names. And I think that it's basically just ripping the Crunchyroll subs, which are much better, in my opinion. That's what I watched originally. So I would recommend that. I would not recommend watching it on Netflix, at least in the subtitles. I actually went and watched some of the dub. I really like the dub, actually. I think that all the actors are really fun. They adapt something that I think is often forgotten when talking about Araki's writing, just because most of us read it in Japanese, or we read it translated from Japanese, and maybe it doesn't hit as hard until you're actually hearing the characters say the words in a language you understand. But his characters are very vulgar. His characters are just always like, what did you say, fucking shrimp shit, or something like that. Like, they talk like that all the time. Characters in JoJo have foul mouths, and they have a lot of fun with that in the translation for the dub. The dub has some really great original lines that I think they're not like a direct one-to-one translation of the original, but I think that they totally keep the spirit of them. I fucking love... There's this one clip from... Okay, so... Trish's voice actress is also voices Pomni from the Amazing Digital Circus, and Ina, or Aina, that little two-toned character. And I found it really funny because at the end of the Notorious B.I.G. fight, when they escape, Trish says something like, "Eat that, bitch meat." which is great. I love that. I love Trish. So I think the dub is actually perfectly worth watching. I've always thought that the JoJo dub was, that from what I'd heard of it, was perfectly good. It's a totally valid way to watch the series, I think. But anyway, that's part 5.